My name is Kostas Terzidis, and I am a professor at Tongji University in the College of Design and Innovation. I'd like to start with a definition. Cybernetics, obviously a Greek word. I'm Greek, and we Greeks value definitions because they allow us to understand what we're talking about. How can I talk about something that I don't know? But also, a definition allows us sometimes to see things that we didn't see at the first sight. So, cybernetics is a word that is a means to guide, at least in the definition in the dictionary. But if you go deeper into the word, you will see that it's made out of three parts. The last one means mind. The middle one means to guide, but the first one means luck. It's the word cube, which you probably know. It means the dice. It means the horn which you throw the dice through. So luck, randomness, is an important factor in the definition of the word cybernetics. So we can redefine, in a way, this word as guiding through randomness. It's not only the target that we're trying to acquire, but it's also the path to it, how to avoid events, random events. It reminds me of, Greek mythology. You probably know the Argonautic expedition or the Odyssey, and they don't go straight to their target because somehow they can't. Random events are obstacle in their ways. So Jason and Odyssey, they have to go through monsters and savages and thunderstorms, hurricanes, deceiving people, traps, which they find in their way. That is why the story is interesting, though. Otherwise, it would be so boring. I just go from A to B. But no, it is the randomness that gives value to the process. So in cybernetics, we have a lot the word feedback, right? And a feedback is something that is very simple, basically. It's something that feeds back to itself. And in a way, it is a balancing system, right, between two things. Something comes in, something comes out, and what comes out gets back to itself. So even though it is unpredictable what's going to be the behavior when it comes back, at the end, the system balancing itself out in a kind of deterministic way. But what if we have randomness in the process of feedback? In other words, we're not exactly sure what's going to come back. Is it going to be exactly what we expect, or there's going to be something lost in the way, or something is being deviated to go in a different direction? And that, I think, is very interesting because it gives us a different perspective on feedback, where the feedback is not necessarily predictable. Okay, so let me give you some examples, right? So we start with something called output. Something comes out, okay, we already know it comes out of the system, and something comes in, we call it input. So when something comes in and something comes out, the system becomes what we call responsive. So for example, take this case over here. We have a photocell on the left side and we have a motor. So as the shadow is being cast on the photocell, that affects the direction of the motor. And you can see it's from the left side, we have a feedback or a response on the side of the motor. Now, a feedback is a little bit different because some of the information comes back to itself. So let's take the same system that you just saw, and here I take the photocell and I stick it on top of the motor. So now as the motor moves, it affects the position of the photocell, right? So you can see over here, I'm moving and the shadow is being cast, but as the motor is being told to move, it starts moving around. But what's also very interesting in this particular example is that the surface is very shiny. So there is a random effect that makes the system appear as if it is trying to avoid something, okay? It looks like it has a mind of its own. And, you know, it looks, you could say it looks very cute, okay? So what if we have two systems, okay? Two feedback systems, which are getting information from outside. So for example, here we have a shadow, but it affects two systems, not one, as we had in the first one. And you can see that each one has a different behavior based on how the shadow gets casted. But what if we cast a shadow to one another? So in other words, we're not gonna look for a common input, but we're gonna make the input of the one be the output of the other. So the one is a shadow, an umbrella to the other one. Look at the behavior of these two systems. Very interesting, right? It looks almost like they're fighting. They're not fighting, but they look like, and this is going to be very interesting later on, because the behavior of something sometimes may be its actual action. So the intention really could be the actual behavior of the system. So what if we put many systems together? So not like two, but we say, let's say 6 or 12 or more. So here is a case where we have 6 fans with 6 photocells. So the photocell basically triggers the fan. But as you can know, the fan can produce wind, and the wind can create a curtain, and the curtain can cover the shadow.
We can do it.
So we have a unpredictable behavior of the shadow because of the wind, right? And you can see here, all of them are interconnected, well, independent, but they look like they're interconnected.
That's a nice move. Try that again. Glide your hand over.
So what we're going to do here, we put little balls of foam that cover the screen. So basically, we produce a shadow that is very random, if you like, because these balls are moving around, but they produce a shadow which actually makes the fans go on and off. And that produces this kind of strange feedback. Or what if we have umbrellas? Each one of them has an umbrella, and each one casts a shadow on the photocell of the other. And then we have this kind of strange behavior for each one of them is doing something else. And I apologize, it's a little bit old, the video. But again, these things are diachronic. So you can see here that it looks like, and you know, from the eyes of the innocent bystander, that there is a mess, right? You have no idea what's going on. And yet, I can claim, or people claim, that there's a very, very specific behavior, and it can be very well deterministic. And that leads us to what we call emergence, okay? And emergence is basically, how can randomness self-organize into entities that are, in a way, appear to be sentient, okay? Let me explain in a minute. This is a random set of dots, black and white, okay? If we go closer, it's just little dots, right? Pixels, let's say bitmap, black and white bitmaps. So let's go and look at one of them, okay? So we just take one of them out, and we say this one here has 3 neighbors, which are black, right? We talk about the red centered there. So we're going to put a rule, and the rule says that if you have more than 4 neighbors, then you become black. Otherwise, you become white. If you apply that to the whole system, it will become something like that. And it makes sense because 4 are the neighbors. It's 8 neighbors, but 4 of them, the middle of them. If there are too many neighbors, it becomes black. If there are too little neighbors, they become white. So eventually everything conglomerates into these kind of blobs, shapes. But what if we do something more interesting? You know, we can do many rules. We can say, like, if you have 3 neighbors, or if 3 neighbors are white and 2 are white, whatever, you can do all kinds of tricks. But one of them is a very interesting rule. And it says that if you have less than 2 neighbors alive, then you die. Basically, you reverse yourself, you become white. If you have 3 neighbors or 2 neighbors, you die. And if you have 3 neighbors, more than 3 neighbors, you die. And if you have exactly 3 neighbors, you become alive again. Okay. Now, if we apply this to the whole system, you get something very, very strange, which is this one over here. The whole system appears as if it's doing something. Of course, nothing is moving. It looks like it's moving, like these little creatures are trying to communicate with one another. You can see sometimes something moving in some direction. And it looks like, as I said before, again, this is an illusion that this thing is moving, but it's not, because it's just a grid of black and white. But the rules make it move. And that is a very interesting kind of like system, because we have an organization that comes from itself, okay? Nobody imposes, nobody starts to move the little dots from one point to the other. Let me give you another example, which also is kind of interesting. Here we have a grid, and we have 2 options. We can put a diagonal in this direction, like right to left or left to right. So let's say randomly go right, then left, then right, then left, then left, then left, then right. You keep going. Now, if we do that to the whole system, we get something very strange. Look at this. It's not a mess, as you may think, but actually it's a very kind of like interesting construction. It looks like a maze, right? If you go far away, you'll see that there is a structure. There's some sort of a logic behind it, which shouldn't be there because we didn't do anything. We just choose 2 random, directions, right or left. And yet the result looks very, very interesting, almost as if it was made by somebody intentionally. Somebody actually created this whole system. And of course, no, because we just saw it. It was just random right or left, okay? That leads us to something called neural networks. So neural networks is a modern version, if you like, of this kind of a search for the order into things. And a neural network basically is a kind of replication, a simulation of a human neural network. And you can see here, this is a real human network where we have these kind of like nerves. But if you look at closer to it, if you open the brain, you'll find that it's basically just a big substance that if you go closer, you find these kind of networks. So it looks like a network. Like you can say it looks something like this, okay? Or like this. So let's take one of them, okay? So this is one neuron, if you like, that is connected with 3 other neurons, okay? And we're gonna make one more and connect this one with these 3 and make this one and connect this one with these 3. And this is a very primitive network. And we can add more or more. And now we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So we can say that the one side is the input. That's the side that is exposed to the outside world. And then it goes through like these other layers. And then it goes to an output, which actually outputs the information into the world, okay? Like eye sees and hand does. It's not like that. It can be very complicated. Like it could be like thousands and millions and billions of neurons. But in general, the logic is very simple, right? So we have one input layer that goes to all the layers on the next one. And then this one gets information from the left side and then puts that into the right side. And then this one does the same thing on the second layer and same and so on until you get at the last layer over there, as you can see, right? And it doesn't have to be all connected. Every layer has to be connected with all the other layers. It could be some of them. For example, here, this neuron is connected only with some of them on the other layer, or this one over here, right? So it doesn't have to be that complicated. Or It could be like a big, big network, which is only connected with the ones that are close to them. So this one over here is connected with the one on the previous layer, or this one is here connected on the previous layer. Of course, they don't have to be in a grid, right? They could be just randomly. For example, I'm not going to disturb the whole system, as you can see here, right? I'm disturbing and disturbing, and it looks like a mess, but it's not. You already know that. You can see that neuron over here. It is connected in the way that it was before, except I just, when it's being packed, it just, the topology, the geometry changes, but the topology is still the same. Now, somehow this system has the ability to memorize. As we say, it can understand, and it can remember something that it saw. Now, how is that possible? Well, let me explain to you real fast over here. So it looks like, take an example of the ocean, right? As the ocean hits the beach, the surface, it makes a line, and that line actually is the geometry of the beach. And the moment that the water recedes, right, it hits the end and then recedes, then it has a memory of the shape of the beach, okay? The same thing happens in a neural network. So let's take this case over here, a very simple case where we have an input, and this is a layer, okay? So it's a layer in which we input the numbers 1 and the number 0, okay? And this is the second layer, okay? And we're going to connect them, right? We connect them and we make these lines to be the weight of 1, just default. It could be anything. And we get a third layer and we connect that too, right? So this is a very primitive 3-layer system that has 2, 3, and 1 node in each one. So we're going to look into one of these nodes, each one of them. We try to produce the numbers that are supposed to be there. So the input is 1 and 0, right? So we go to this neuron over here. We say, okay, this neuron over here has to be put a 1 times 1, right? Which is this, and then a 0 times 1. If you add this together, it gets 1. So we put that 1 there. Very nice, right? The second one is the same exactly. So we put another 1 there. The third one is the second one. We put the 1 there. And the third one, of course, is 1 times 1 plus 1 times 1, 1 plus 1, and that is 3. And that is correct. So now we have put the information, we have filled the information that we wanted from the 1 and 0 all the way, and it says that the result is 3. Very nice. We call this forward propagation. Nice. But what if 3 is not right? What if somehow we know that 3 is not a correct number? It has to be 1, because we don't go more than 3. Let's say we have a rule, or that's what we want it to be. So we go and replace the 3 with a 1. Now the system wouldn't work, right? Because 3 and 3 and 3, sorry, 1 and 1 and 1 will be 3. So it's not going to work out. So we have to somehow change those values. So if we went at 1/3, right, times 3, it becomes 1, which is correct, correct? And the other one, also, we can make that 0. So now the system is correct. We call this thing a backward propagation. Now, this is very interesting because if you take this 1 and 0 and you compare it with the other inputs, if you input, for example, 0, 0, 1, 1, or 0, 1, you can see here that the what we call the latent space, the hidden layers, the information here is different, right? Here has 0, 0, 0. This has 0. This has 0.5. They're not the same. So it means that 1, 0 is understandable, recognizable by the system, right? Let's take this one over here, right? We're going to put, we have 3 input information, right? We have a, so we're going to put all the possible combinations of, which are 8 possible combinations of 3 digits, right? 3 binaries, right? And you can see that all of them are different, except 1. So it can always recognize 0, 0, 1, which is the one we're looking for. And that could be done to anything. So, for example, we can take text, music, or images and kind of remember them in a kind of strange way. So let's take, for example, my face, right? The pixels of my face. And we put them into this neural network. And then this neural network has a latent space that is unique to me. So therefore, only I can open the door, okay? Because, and what's interesting about this is that it's not a pixel base, because if it was pixel, and I move my face a little bit right or left, then it would be different pixels, right? But the latent space doesn't change. So it means that it will still recognize me even if I move my face right or left. And that is a big advantage compared to the pixel-based, right? So that is a system that we just saw over here, which is kind of like interesting, but it has a problem because you have to teach it. And we don't have the time to teach it, what is right and what is wrong, what Kostas is and Kostas is not. So what we do is we do something else. We make a neural network that is kind of like a copy of itself. It's a symmetrical one, right? So we put two networks together. So this particular one, we call it an autoencoder because whatever comes in, three inputs become three outputs. So it means that the output can become input to itself, right? So there it is. It's a flip from one another, right? Now, this is interesting because you can feed back the network to itself. The output can become input, right? So, for example, let's take this case over here. At time 0, we have an input, and that input exports an output. And at time 2, that output becomes input, and then the output becomes input, and so on and so forth. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing it because now we can actually use the feedback of itself to teach it what is going on. So, for example, take text. Text is very easy because it's already syntactically correct by people who already did it. So the system knows that if I see an I, then I see probably an M, then I'm at and the, right? So this is a sequence of inputs. The I becomes an M, becomes an at, and becomes a the. Or let's say I have to be, right? This is a sequence of 3 events, and that you're training the system to understand the sequence that they have. Or I want to come, right? And this, we call this sequences, we call them large language models, LLM. And if you go to your iPhone or your phone, you may start randomly picking like the middle button every time it suggests you the new word, and you see that it makes a lot of sense. Why? Because the statistics, if you like, the neural network is trained to know these sequences, which are the most possible ones as they come one after another. And that produces the effect that you just saw. Very, very interesting. So now we can do many things, right? So this feedback system or the neural networks can actually produce very interesting things. One of which is what we call a competition, right? So we have $1, okay? Pixels, basically, of $1. And we train the system. We train the neural network to understand what $1 is. So every time it sees $1, it says, yeah, it's $1, okay? Now what we do is we present it with random, nothing. In other words, we close the eyes, but we remember what $1 looks like, right? Even though the layer over here is all random, like, or nothing, because you close your eyes, still your mind remembers what the $1 looks like. So as you do this over and over and over, you end up producing a new $1, right? This $1 looks like a cartoon, but basically it's being produced by going over and over, by remembering, basically, imagining, if you like. That would be, you know, I'm using kind of like strange words, but imagining what $1 would look like. Really, that's what's happening. You're denoising a $1 picture, and you remember it by reconstructing what it's looking at. And this is how diffusion and Midjourney work, right? You have seen these systems over here. So in that particular case of Midjourney, you have my face, right? And what we do is you try to noise it. You try to put noise, but you remember my face. So here I'm putting noise and noise and noise, and eventually I got noise, right? Here is noise. But really, it's not noise because I have a memory of me, okay? It looks to the eyes as if I have noise, but in my memory, it is there. So here, I'm noising my face, and I'm noising a hat. Now I take these two noises, this one and that one, and we combine them together, and then the hat comes onto my head. So I'm combining two things together. And of course, it's not that simple. There's a lot of things you have to know where the hat is going to be fitting, and it's all based on context or based on where things are and the timing that they're put there. But at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're closing your eyes and trying to remember what I look like and how to remember what a hat looks like. And then in your mind, you combine these two memories, if you like, of my face and my hat, and you make a new hat, right? And that's really what's happening over here. Okay, so for example, these are like faces, like, again, these have to come from somewhere, and they come from databases, and that's why databases are so important. And hats have to come from database. So you randomly pick a face, randomly pick a hat, and then you put them together, and you produce the effect that you have. But that, in a way, is a little bit of a problem. And the problem is that, first of all, the data is closed. It's a closed space, right? This is all the faces. You cannot get a face that is not there. You cannot get a hat that is not there, okay? And that could be a problem because it leads towards a misconception of what really is the production of this new thing. It produces what we call a fake thing. What do I mean by fake? I mean that this thing actually is not really what it looks like. It's not a real innovated, not innovative, but original, if you like, something that didn't exist before. It did exist. Let me give you an example here. You probably remember morphing, right? Morphing is a very common back in the 1980s. And, the famous Bushama, right? You know who Bushama is. It's this guy here, okay? Now, if you look at this guy, it's kind of strange because he looks like Bush, but he looks like Obama at the same time, right? So he has this kind of strange feeling that I'm seeing two things at the same time. And of course, the way you do it is basically you take the two faces and you put them together. And the technique is pretty simple. You take the word Bush and the word Obama and you combine them together to make a new word. But basically, all you do is you go into the database and you select one picture of Bush and you take one picture of Obama. And then you take the pixels on the screen, right? You find where the eyes are, where the mouth is, and then you combine them together by interpolating the value because one eye is going to be a little bit out, a little down. So you have to put the in-between, if you like, and you produce this image called Bushama, right? Very, very interesting. Now, if you go into Midjourney and you prompt camera cat, you're going to get this. It's not going to be a camera that looks like, it's not going to be in between a camera and a cat. You're going to have this camera with a cat in a kind of strange way. It almost appears as if they are somehow sentient, like logically understands what a cat is and what a camera and produces a new version of it. But how does that work? Well, it's very simple again. It's almost the same as the morphing. You have a camera and you have a cat. So you go into the database and you select a random camera. You go into the database and select a random cat. Then you extract a neural network, the latent space of the camera and the cat. And you take these two latent space, interpolate them, and produce, I mean, again, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but we say it's almost similar, that you take the in-between, the adjusted value of the latent space, and that produces the cat that you saw, which is a little bit different because it's not pixel-based, it's more like memory-based, it's more like ontology-based. And that actually is a very important thing. Of course, The Bushama thing was a big thing back in the 1980s, and people were very scared about it. They thought like, oh, if we can make these kind of things, we're going to produce terrible political problems, or we're going to produce monsters if we start morphing people with animals. And that is true. Of course, it was very, very, kind of scary, but at the same time fun, because you kind of like played with these games of kind of parenting, merging, hybridizing people with anything, or anything with anything. The same is true today, where you have the same problem with political things. Like, for example, you can have like, this is all from Midjourney, where you actually prompt like, make Trump be friends with Biden, or like, put, whatever, all these kind of things. It's just a prompt. You just make it. So the people are dangerous, actually, who write the prompts. But the system itself merges the thing that you tell them, right? It's basically a modern version of the of morphing. Okay, and if you ask one of the most important people in this field, who has a great record, Chomsky, he says that these systems are just sophisticated high-tech plagiarism, which is true. It's just plagiarism. So in other words, there's nothing original in this whole thing. They're just combining things that already existed into a new thing. But that brings up a very interesting concept, which I call diapathy. Now, what is diapathy? You probably never heard that word before, because I just made it up, okay? It's my own word. And it comes from the word sympathy. You probably know what sympathy is. Sympathy is when you like somebody, right? Or empathy. Empathy is when you feel for somebody. You feel that I am like you, or I feel I'm in your shoes. I'm with you. So, for example, you can get the feeling of being a cat, the feeling of being flying in the sky, the feeling of, I don't know, being a dog, or anything that is, so you are empathetic. You have a empathy for that. And computer graphics are very important because they can allow you to see things in a way that is much more realistic. For example, the sounds and the motion and moving in space makes it much, much more realistic than you would experience in real life. And sometimes it's even more real than the real thing. For example, here, you cannot tell if it's really true or not true, right? I mean, of course, this is graphics and nothing really happens, but to humans, or no animals are being harmed in this movie. But you get this kind of like idea that there's something going on.
Hi, everybody.
You can also
Hi,
put
Kostas.
yourself, right?
Costa, can you do me a favor? Can you press are you a robot?
So it could be somebody else. I can be like somebody else that I can never be, but I can also be myself, right? I can make myself be a very good singer or a very good dancer, or I can look at myself when I was, let's say, 5 years old, back in 1967, okay? And that is what we call empathy. Now, diapathy is a very different concept. It's similar, but it's different. Diapathy is when you use something, or you use somebody to become, okay? So I use somebody to make me be, all right? What do I mean by that? Take the case of a very good example is a fruit. Now, when you see a fruit on the table, you're attracted to eat it if you're hungry, and then you eat it, and then you throw away the rest of it, including the seeds. From a human point of view, it looks like you just ate a fruit. But from the fruit's point of view, the fruit made itself attractive to you so that you eat it, and by eating it, you throw the seeds somewhere else. So in other words, it used you to become, okay? Or take a flower, right? A flower, it looks like the bee or the bird is attracted to the flower, but really the flower makes the bee attracted to it. It uses it in order to become. And that is a very strange concept, because we reverse the whole role of things. So, for example, a teacher, right? I'm a lecturer right now, and I'm lecturing to you. But without you, I'm nobody. You make me who I am. The environment of Zoom and new people and the audience makes me who I am. Otherwise, I'm just talking to nobody, right? And at the same time, you make yourself who you are through me. By looking at me, you become the audience, right? And this is a very strange kind of thing, because in many ways we think of it as the same thing, but it's not. We change the point of view of things. So is the kid playing with the ball, or the ball is using the kid to become? You look at a key on the street and you say, oh, this key is like, somebody has lost it. No, the door who this key is connected to is mourning the loss of the key, okay? And again, I don't know if you see where I'm taking with this. I'm trying to get into the idea of the artifacts, the artificial things, and how they have a mind of their own. And this goes into very interesting kind of like directions. So, for example, here is a little story about a woman who was eavesdropping on the wall where there were a lot of cracks. And the cracks were actually making some noises that she thought that there's people on the other side. And every night she would hear the voices or whatever these on the cracks. And one day she went on the other side of the wall to find who is there, because she was so interested in the stories, only to find that there was nobody there. So basically what she was doing, she was hearing the cracks. The cracks were talking to her. So the cracks were the ones who actually were the actors in the story, not the humans behind it. It goes into many, many directions. And this, for example, is a secret. What is a secret? A secret is something that we own, or is it something that it owns us, okay? It can affect us, it can do things to us, so it has a mind of its own in a kind of strange way. And it goes, like I said before, like this is a note in a piece of paper that somebody wrote. He could have died now, he can be gone. We don't know, we have to interpret what that means and how it goes on. And this becomes a very rich area of investigation into artificial intelligence. What really is artificial intelligence in a kind of like ontological, if you like, existential way? The things around us, the objects that we have a mind of their own. Or what if they had a mind of their own? And this goes back in time where things did have a mind of their own, according to our ancestors, where the wind would tell us what to do, or the coffee, the cracks on the turtle would actually determine the way we communicate with people and what will happen to us. And this leads us to many, many different stories. This is a story that I wrote. It's a little play, a one-act play about the Russian roulette. The Russian roulette, as you probably know, is a very dangerous game. Don't play it. But what's interesting about it is that it has randomness about it. There are 6 holes and 1 bullet, and you can shoot, but you never know if you're going to be killed or not. But at the same time, the gun knows. The gun knows where the bullet is. So if we look at from the point of view of the gun is aware of the position of the lucky bullet, and you don't. And this became like a nice little theatrical piece in which we are dealing with 2 personas here, 2 actors. One is a drug addict, a person who wants to kill himself, but he cannot do it because he is too weak. And the gun, which is the Russian roulette. So the gun actually is in a conversation with the human, because the gun actually doesn't want to kill the human, because if it kills a human, then it won't be a gun, it will be a gun again. But now it's a friend. It gave him an existence. The gun used the person to become. And of course, the person will want to use the gun to not become, because so this kind of game between predictability and unpredictability became a nice theatrical piece that I have put together, which leads us to the final part of what I'm going to say here, which is two experiments. And these experiments are very interesting because they give us a kind of like different direction of cybernetics in a kind of like more futuristic way. And the first one is experiment that is related to a story. And the story is related to me being in the lockdown. During the lockdown, I had a lot of time. And during that time, I was watching movies. Now, one of these movies was this one called True Stories by David Byrne. You probably know him from the musical group called Talking Heads. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He wrote this little movie, which was very interesting, and I was kind of like very fascinated by it. But as I was looking at the movie, there was the last scene, the closing credits on the movie, and there it is. And this is actually the last frame in the whole movie. I saw the whole movie, of course. And I saw something very interesting in this. And I look at it again and again. I saw like, there's a phrase at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it over there. It says, if you can think of it, it exists somewhere. Now, I was very fascinated with that because I thought it was a very philosophical argument. If you can think of it, it exists. In other words, if I can think of you, you exist. So my thinking of you, my conceptualizing of you, my memory of you is who you are, right? And that's, I thought, to the little that I knew, that this is a very interesting argument, very profound, if you like, argument. So then I said, okay, what if I take all these words and I put them into placeholders, right? And I produce new sentences. And I order them randomly in different ways. And I produce all the possible combinations. And according to my very primitive mathematics, it would be 8 placeholders, 8 words, 8 to the power of 8 is 16,777,216 possible sentences, right? Here they are. Whether randomly or enumerating, we have all these sentences, right? And there they are. Many, as I said before, 16 million, almost 17 million sentences. Now, I was thinking, well, I can find the sentence that I already know, right? Because they should be there. But also, maybe I may find a sentence that I don't know. And what if that sentence is better than the one that I know? And so I was thinking, how can I go through all these sentences? There's too many. I cannot do that. It's, it will take me like years to go through all the sentences. At the end, I will be, not interested anymore. So my problem was time. So instead of me going through all the sentences, I decided, what if I make a neural network? A neural network basically is a way of making a copy of me, right? That actually can discern all these sentences and eventually can recommend, based on my preferences, some sentences that would be appropriate for my liking. And that's what I did. And I run the system, and eventually I came up with, the system at least, recommended to me these 4 sentences, right? If you can think of it, it exists, you can think of it, it can think of you. But the last sentence was very interesting. It says, if it can think of you, you exist. Now, this is very different from the original sentence. If you remember, the original sentence in the David Byrne film was, if I can think of you, if you can think of it, it exists. That's what it said, right? And that is very selfish in a way, because it basically means that my existence makes you who you are, as if I am the responsible for your existence. But this sentence over here is very much more profound, because it says that if it, not him, not her, it can think of you, then you exist. Okay, let's put it into English syntax. If it can think of you, you exist. Now, this is much more profound in my mind, because it basically says that my existence is pertinent to the thing that makes me who I am? And that is a very, very deep philosophical argument, all right? But most importantly, the question is, how is that being created? Because, obviously I didn't do it. But at the same time, people say that, oh yeah, you didn't do it, but you wrote the code. You wrote the real neural network. So therefore, you made the sentence indirectly. It cannot be made on its own. So I said, okay, you're right. Let me go through my code. So I go through my code line by line to see where exactly is it that I could have made a decision that would affect the system in order for it to choose that sentence. And I found nowhere that, okay? I found that there's a random, which I cannot control, just a random number, a random generator, which has nothing to do with me, geometry, which I don't obviously control, permutations, which are also like, again, systems of predetermined data, rules, syntax, sentences, and random. None of them I had the ability to interfere, okay? But even if you don't believe that my code is not responsible for the generation of that sentence, suppose that I just write these words in a piece of paper and I put them on the table. And then I open the window and the wind blows and they fall onto the floor. And I do that millions and millions of times. Is it possible that one time, just one time, there's going to be the sentence that we just generated? If it can think of you, you exist. Duh, obviously it will happen, right? And the problem again is that who is the author of this sentence? It's a very profound sentence. I mean, the previous one is probably David Byrne, right? It's a person, it's a human, it's a sentient man who said, like, I'm going to write this sentence. He thought about it, and somehow through his life, he wrote that sentence. But this one over here, which is the it, who wrote it? Who is responsible for that? And, people have a lot of objectives about this kind of experiment, and I know it's true. And they say, like, oh, at the end of the day, I have to interpret it, right? So therefore, it doesn't matter because it's text and I have to interpret it. That is true. But at the same time, forget as if it's words and sentient word like syntax, language. Suppose that it was a lock, okay? Just a lock. And as I go through different combinations, one time it opens, right? Now, opening a lock has nothing to do with sentient. It's just a opening into a world, okay? And that was done by random. So what I'm trying to say here is that the random itself became the, what's the word? The creation of the feedback system that actually solved the problem. Okay, and it was not me with my sentient logic that actually solved the problem. It was the randomness that made me. Okay, I was created through the randomness. Basically, is the author, if you like, of that sentence, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so experiment number 2. Okay, so the second experiment is, I think, very interesting here because it's based on a novel by Garcia Garcia Marquez. You probably know it, Love in the Time of Cholera. It's a very nice book. And during the lockdown, during COVID, I had an infinite time at my disposal. So I read this book one more time. And actually, there's also a movie. And they're very interesting because it's a story of it's a triangle of 2 men and a woman, Fermina, Florentino, and Urbino. And the story goes as kind of like the beginning of the story is where Fermina is in love with Florentino, but then the father doesn't like it, so she takes her away into another city, and she gets married to Urbino, which is a doctor, and then they live 50 years, and eventually he dies, and she goes back to her hometown, and only to find Florentino waiting for her. And again, the story is pretty simple in a way. I mean, apart from the details, it's a very simple story. It's basically 2 men and a woman and their connection with them. So what I did is I created a system, what I call a particle system, okay? And I have two rules, okay? One is that men are attracted to women, and men don't attract to one another, and women don't attract. I mean, this is kind of like basic rules, and then I just run the system to produce all these triangles possible. And you can see here that this is randomly moving, but every time the actors get close to one another, I record their position, right? And as I record the position, I make these narratives, okay? Now, it turned out that one of the narratives that was being produced is the story of Garcia Marquez, okay? Which is very funny because, again, this is completely random, but it turns out that this random event did have a copy, produced a copy of the story itself. So what I did is I took these pieces, okay, of these connections, the story itself, and then I interpret them, right? So there's the data, which is basically A is close to B. Then I say, I describe it in human language, and then I make a little interpretation of that story. And that produces the story that you just saw. Of course, the particles have no intention. They don't fall in love with each other, but the scenario of the motion is similar to that of the story. What is interesting, however, is not the simulation itself, but the fact that the particles, in the particles case, that the particles continue to move, right? So in the case of Garcia, he finishes at the end where the two actors are, in love and they go on a ferry boat and blah, blah, blah. But what happens afterwards? Because obviously Fermina had a daughter, and that daughter didn't like Florentino. So there is a continuation of the story. So with the particle, I was able to find the sequence, the sequel to the story, what happened afterwards, according to the particles, or what happened before the whole story began. What happened to the heroes after the end, or what happened to the heroes before the story began. Again, these are very strange things, but what I'm trying to point out here is that there is something that is very strange, that is, again, stochastic in nature, and yet sentient in a kind of strange way, because we have been assuming that conscious intentions are always human, or at least they're animal-based, like motion-based. And we don't think that objects have intention. And yet, it turns out that randomness itself, as a event, if you like, does have this ability. It's important to mention here that both cases, the intention of the actors are not important in this experiment. We don't care about their feelings, their interests, their intentions. We present only the result, okay, regardless of the intention. Whether it is human or accidental, we don't care. We do not attach any importance to the human nature, because in any case, we can hide whether the story is human or accidental without being able to affect the result. I had to be the one who breaks out the news, but the Turing test that we all think that is the passing test is long, long, long gone. Okay. In other words, nothing will change if we reveal who and what is behind the result, because the result is always going to be the same. What interests us here is the interpretation of the result. And yet, although interpretation is important to convince the audience, the inspiration of the story is definitely not human at all. Finally, I would like to close with a strange analogy. I said that earlier, and I'll say it again. The Russian roulette, again, no pun intended, they say that guns do not kill, people kill. Guns are just tools that people use with whatever intentions they may have. That is not true, though, in the case of the Russian roulette, because there is no opponent in the Russian roulette. The only opponent is you and your luck. which you don't control. You play with an opponent that exists and does not exist at the same time in a game that is and is not a game, and with a tool, a gun that you control and you do not control. So think about that again twice next time you pull the trigger. Thank you very much.